we have a storied history that I think we should be very proud of, because from our own little corner of this country, we too have a story to tell.
Klansmen, the racist, the hater, the bigot, but they will not tag me as some homosexual, AIDS-infested pervert.
We've got to give life to those champions and heroes who have given us so much. We can't forget about that.
The fact of the matter is that we are equally protected under the Constitution, and we should not be discriminated against.
Here, there were a lot of issues involving the gay and lesbian community that needed attention, that needed to change.
Gay life in South Florida in the 1970s was basically explored in nightclubs, where people could freely be who they were and express themselves openly. The last thing on the mind of people in the gay community was a desire, to get married or serve in the Army.
Back then, while it was a teeming gay community, it was still a component of our city that was not as accepting of the gay lifestyle.
Have you ever known a homosexual man?
There were marches and pickets in front of the Presbyterian Church on Federal Highway. That preacher was preaching anti-gay rhetoric also. It was just a whole feeling, and the police were nasty.
What they were trying to do back then was say homosexuals are deviants and perverts who are here to take away your children. That's why Anita Bryant's group was called Save Our Children. There was this presumption, if we were going to be open about homosexuality, we would therefore be recruiting their children.
You didn't want to be out if you didn't have to be.
There were raids on bars for no reason. They would make up a reason, of course. There's a fire ordinance, or it's overcrowded, or there's drugs involved. But, they really just were doing it to be, harassing.
Everything that happened in the bars opened up the door to civil rights advances for the LGBT community in South Florida.
We had a sheriff back then who was definitely anti-gay.
The raid on the Copa occurred on May 3rd, 1991.
They came in and told the manager to shut down the music, turn on all the lights, which of course he did. And they began lining people up against the wall, frisking people, asking them their name, their address, their phone number. 350
gay men and women were being paraded out of the Copa nightclub, one by one, hands above their head, filmed with a camera, their name and identity revealed to law enforcement and the community.
They were treated like they were, criminals. They were treated like they were going to be detained in a death camp or something. It was terrible. And they arrested some of the entertainers that I had there that were in drag. They arrested my manager, my assistant manager, and some of the patrons also.
So it was an unconscionable, unlawful raid engineered by a law enforcement agency without, in my mind, sufficient probable cause to unconstitutionally detain and wrongfully deny hundreds of gay people their rights.
There were innocent people that were being charged with what? Nothing. And yet they were harassed to this extent.
People that had their face exposed to the camera were facing job sanctions, termination from employment, public humiliation.
So I figured this is time to take a stand. So I hired Norm Kent to sue them, which we did. We won the lawsuit. We made them donate money to AIDS organizations here in Fort Lauderdale, which they did.
But a funny thing happened to Nick Navarro and to all those who want to take away our rights and repress them. It was called an election, and he got beat.
We feel that Sheriff Navarro was, defeated in that election because of this raid and the notoriety that it got. It was in the papers for weeks and weeks.
We actually were able to get Sheriff Ron Cochran at the time and the Fort Lauderdale police chief to agree to make it mandatory for every police officer and every deputy to attend training. And they did, they had to. We met with a lot of hostility because the officers surely didn't want to think they were doing anything wrong or out of bounds, but they were.
Ron Cochran, who came in after him, really made a difference. I think that was the biggest plus for the gay community, was his election as sheriff.
There was still a lot of fear about repression in our community, so we were there, but we tried to stay under the radar.
We wound up forming a group called GUARD.
Gays United to Attack Repression and Discrimination.
It was definitely a radical element within our community that was looking to push back against the any kind of discrimination that was practiced in our city.
You filthy, perverted homosexual! What do you think you're doing? You're not America, you're pervert!
And they mobilized, and we didn't have just parades like you do now. Then we had marches.
A great event GUARD was involved in was the Reclaim America for Christ conference that was held by the Reverend James D. Kennedy at his church on Federal Highway in Fort Lauderdale.
He was also, through that church and through his ministry, a national televangelist. He was vocally against gay rights.
He had been spouting hate and using hatred towards the gay and lesbian community as a cash cow. The man raised millions of dollars for getting money from people that supported his views on hatred and bigotry against the gay community.
I think it was so wrong for a minister to be so unchristian.
It was definitely not one of Fort Lauderdale's shining moments. At the same time, we were hit with the AIDS epidemic.
The AIDS epidemic did affect, I think, everything in Fort Lauderdale, everything.
The gay community really didn't know how to react to it. The gay community thought that there would be a cure. They never really thought that it would be so difficult to find a cure. We all just assumed that it would happen soon, and it didn't.
Probably lost more people in my life during that time than a lot of people did. Even in South Florida. Yep.
Some people changed their lifestyles, many people didn't, and those that didn't aren't here to talk about it anymore.
It just became so depressing that your friends, were going down your address book, crossing off names. I threw my address book away because I didn't want to cross off another name.
As a lawyer, I was doing a number of deathbed wills. It was very, very sad. And our community suffered psychologically as well as through the deaths that we experienced.
I do remember how incredible the people were to rally during the AIDS crisis and the kindness that was shown throughout our community.
The Community Foundation of Broward started working on issues affecting the LGBT community as a result of the impact that the HIV/AIDS crisis was having on Broward County. We were the only non-governmental entity raising our voice around this issue. So not only did we step up in a leadership role to vocalize the impact of HIV/AIDS in the gay community, but we also stepped into a financial role, and we supported many organizations.
AIDS Center 1 was the first nonprofit that materialized in Fort Lauderdale to be able to help people, direct them to medications, counseling. There wasn't really a lot to help people.
A lot of the community was mobilized and active around that huge issue and trying to do something about that and affect change legally and with hospitals. And I think that really galvanized a lot of people to take it from there and get involved in other aspects of protections and benefits for gays and lesbians.
The gay community as a whole felt one thing we just want is just some protection under the law. And that probably started the push for some kind of human rights ordinance in Broward County.
A group of activists here in Fort Lauderdale got together and were making an effort to add sexual orientation to an equal rights ordinance that already existed in Broward County laws.
The first human rights campaign in Broward was a campaign that was as beige and oatmeal campaign as you can get, They went out of their way not to say anything remotely controversial, to avoid anything that anyone could have an issue with. It was trying to get all these other elected official groups to say they support human rights for everyone. It was all about for everyone.
The opposition certainly was energetic, to say the least. They sent out mailers and did advertising that was hurtful and you know, talk about all the things that we always used to hear. Child molesters, and we're here to recruit, and we're self-hating, and you know, all the things that made people feel that this is the wrong element to bring into our lives, and I couldn't believe some of the things they were saying.
There was an organized effort led by Dr. Kennedy and his church at the time and others to try to stop it.
We attempted to go to house parties and events and all kinds of canvassing efforts to make people aware that this effort was going to happen.
It was on the ballot. It didn't do embarrassingly badly, it just didn't win. But part of the mistake was it's always hard to win a campaign to add rights by the ballot because you're asking a majority to give something to the minority.
Steve Ferrin was a state representative who had a brother who passed away from HIV. And he decided he was going to do something in his memory. And what happened was he had a private bill passed which said that you didn't need to do a county-wide referendum in order to amend the human rights ordinance of your county. The county commission itself could. So now it helped us to the extent that we didn't have to go out and have the community vote on our rights. It was the county commission would do that.
So the gay rights ordinance, still called the human rights ordinance in its title, but to add sexual orientation came back a few years later with my mother and Lori Parrish, who were county commissioners. My mom, Sue Gunzberger, and Lori Parrish were on the county commission then, and they were asked to sponsor it now.
I didn't know it at the time, but Sue Gunzberger had just been elected. And when you take over a seat at the commission, you have board seats to fill, and she decided that I would be the perfect person to bring forward an amendment to the Human Rights Ordinance to include sexual orientation. And of course, having a gay son, she was very gay friendly.
So there wasn't universal acceptance of us, and there were certain commissioners especially who were completely, you know, unwilling to give us equal rights.
Hamilton Foreman was a crazy old guy who was rich as King Midas, and he was a Democrat, but he was a fundamentalist Christian. And he had opposed gay rights the last time around in the early 90s. Long story short, I met with Ham Foreman for 2 hours. I had to sit there and listen to his rantings about gay people and his experience with the mafia. What he finally decided, what reconciled him to agreeing to not take a position against the amendment of the Human Rights Ordinance, was that he was going to make a deal with me, and that I was going to promise in the future that he could call in his chips whenever, and that I would throw my gay and lesbian weight behind his issues. We got to the second hearing at the Broward County Commission on June 13th. I believe there were 300 seats in the room, and the overflow filled up the hall outside.
Dr. Kennedy came and spoke against it. There were issues on it, and from what I even recall, one of the county commissioners even wore a bulletproof vest because he was worried something could happen at the meeting.
1 out of 3 of the people that spoke were against us, and it was just horrible to hear the kinds of things that they said.
There were some very, very hurtful speeches that were made by folks. There was one friend of mine who was part of the effort who had HIV, and his brother got up and spoke and said things like, you know, well, obviously, you know, God hates you because you have HIV and you will die because of it.
All we wanted was to have the same rights and be treated with the same respect as any other neighbor on our block.
In the end, it passed 6-1.
When they finally voted, it was unbelievable. I mean, we were, of course, standing up and cheering and crying. I mean, I could almost cry thinking about it.
So Broward County, at some point by the year 2000, people who were gay and lesbian who lived in Broward County were fortunate because while state law didn't protect us, county law did protect us.
It was a heady time to be gay and to feel that, wonderful relief.
All of those efforts together emboldened other people to see that maybe some of us weren't going to lose our livelihoods and our families and our friends and our homes if we came out.
The activities and the successes that happened in the 80s and the 90s in the gay and lesbian community definitely paved the way for the younger people today and people my age also, because we're still out there, there's still homophobia, there are still people that would not want to be inclusive.
Today we live in a time where people can't just discriminate against you outrightly, and legally. However, it still happens, and we heard from our LGBT neighbors that we should not be fooled. It still happens today. So we've come a long way in the nation, we've come a long way in our community. However, what we learned was that we still have a ways to go.
The battle is being fought in many ways as much today as it was back then. You can't ever be apathetic, you always have to be assertive. You can't ever lay back, you have to stand up.
The whole fight was equality, and while we're not there yet, we're pretty darn close.
It's no coincidence that Fort Lauderdale has the highest percentage of same-sex households in the entire country, and I feel very proud of that. I feel like I helped create that. But like I've said to all my friends who are half my age, it's your turn now.